Everyone, I'm a few seconds early here this morning, but we'll go ahead and get started. It's good to be here this morning, and I was telling Oliver last night that this format made it really easy to, well, not easy, it's always work to study and put things together, but it's nice to have a framework to work within. I didn't have to come up with ideas on my own. We're just working through the book, and that lended itself really nicely to the lesson to follow. So, I don't know how it's been going for you, but what I've watched online, it seems like it's a pretty good thing going on there. So, obviously, we're continuing through the fourfold gospel, and I've been given chapter XIX, which is, what is that, 19? I'm not Roman. And so, chapter 19 of the fourfold gospel moves us from the baptism of Jesus, which Daniel covered last week, in chapter 3 into chapter 4, where Jesus is tempted in the wilderness. And I'll go ahead and read the three accounts really quick first, and then we can circle back and dive into the text. But what's interesting is John doesn't cover this. So we only have Matthew, Mark, and Luke that have accounts of this. John goes right from 1, 33, 34, Jesus being baptized, to 35 and 36, where he's starting to choose apostles. So let's jump in and read through this together real quick. In Matthew 4:1, it says, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread.' But he answered and said, 'It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God.' Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. And on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone.' Jesus said to him, 'Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test.' So again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, 'All of these I will give to you, if you will fall down and worship me.' Then Jesus said to him, 'Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and only use.'" Let's try that again. "You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him. Mark is a much shorter account, just 2 verses. It says in 1:12 and 13, "The Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him." Then Luke 4:1, starting in chapter 1. "And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan, and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing during those days. And when they were ended, he was hungry. The devil said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread.' And Jesus answered, 'It is written, man shall not live by bread alone.' And the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said to him, 'To you I will give all this authority and their glory. For it has been delivered to me, and I give it to whom I will. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours.' And Jesus answered him and said, 'It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve.' And he took him to Jerusalem and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you. And on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone.' And Jesus answered him, 'And it is said, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test.' And when the devil had ended every temptation, he departed from him until the opportune time." So really quickly before we get into the text, just for some visual context, this is the wilderness a picture from somewhere in the wilderness near Jerusalem. And to be quite honest, this kind of looks a lot like the hill up behind my house, just sagebrush and dirt. It's another photo from the wilderness at sunset, off of some cliffs, and you can see some water down there in the background. The wilderness was quite vast back then, stretching from the western edge of the Dead Sea north along much of the Jordan River. So there's no real way to know where any of this stuff happened, except for obviously the temple. And this green thing here, this Mount Nabi Yunus, that's the highest point in the area, in the wilderness, that he would have been taken to. So it's possibly the place that Jesus went. I mean, obviously nobody knows, but just as a reference, that's the highest point in the area. And it is, the word Nabi Yunus actually means prophet Jonah, which I thought was kind of interesting. But it's 3,380 feet tall is this highest place here. And just for a little bit of perspective so that we know what that looks like, Stevens Pass is 4,061 feet at the top. Snoqualmie is 3,015 feet, so 365 feet taller than Snoqualmie and 638 feet shorter than Stevens Pass. Again, just some more physical things. If any of you, like me, I've always read this and I thought, well, he's talking about the desert, so there's maybe a scorpion or a lizard or some birds or, something like that, maybe some vultures. And that's probably all there was in the wilderness. That's the beasts he's talking about in the wilderness. Has any of you guys ever thought that? Not much out there. Well, if you did, you'd be wrong just like me. Because today, right now, there's camels, this ibex thing, red-necked ostrich. This is something called a caracal, which is like a little bobcat or something like that. And then there's still Arabian leopards in that wilderness where Jesus would have been. Today there is. But in Jesus' time, and there's also various birds of prey, reptiles, a couple of species of vipers. But in Jesus' time, there would have been the Syrian brown bear, the Asiatic lion. What else we got here? The Asiatic cheetah, and this red deer, which all four of those are extinct now. But those are some serious wild animals that you could encounter in the wilderness, aren't they? In 40 days, I think he had to have come across some of these things, spotted them, seen them, whatever. It's just not super important to the text, but interesting that this is what he's talking about in terms of animals that are out there. So let me ask you guys a question. What are the differences that pop out at you between the three accounts that we read? The order, yep, absolutely. What else? So the first thing for me is that Mark's the only one that tells us about the wild animals, which is why we went on the safari just a minute ago. The order's different, which is my number 2 on the list here. What about the way it words it in Matthew versus Luke? Because when I read Matthew, I've always read that to mean the temptation happened at the end of the 40 days. He was out there by himself wandering around. And then when 40 days was up, Satan comes to him. But the Luke account paints it that he was being tempted the entire time. So it's not a problem with the text. To my way of thinking, it's just one gives us more information that there was more temptations going on. But when in Matthew, he doesn't bother us with the smaller things that were going on. It's not until he gets to, you're hungry, let's eat, that he starts recording the temptations. Oops. Anything else pop out at anybody? Just another little geographical note, when it says that he took him up, it just like every place else in the Bible, when it says up or down, it really is in elevation, up or down. I mean, which makes sense. He was in the Jordan and up into the wilderness. So, but just something to note, another place where the Bible is always accurate, and when it says things like up and down, it really means elevation, up and down.
I think it's interesting that he talks about all the kings of the world in an instant in Luke, where it just talks about all the kingdoms and their glory in Matthew.
Right.
Like, that time frame that maybe even showed every kingdom in the history of the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, isn't it? Yeah, because they're not like us. They have that power. We can't see every kingdom ever, either forward of time or backward of time. They're standing there, but it was in an instant. So yeah, that's an interesting.
Furthermore, you were talking about how the highest peak in that area was the one that you showed. I always had an impression that maybe to the highest point on Earth, like top of Mount Everest or something.
Oh,
The highest mountain.
that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I just assumed it would be in the region. So, but we're not talking about guys that have the same limitations you and I do.
Right.
So that could be, that it was the highest. So if we look at the first temptation, I'm going to take them in the order of Matthew just because that's the first book. What do you guys think is the power of that first temptation?
He would have been hungry.
Is that not the understatement of the year? He would have been, after 40 days, he would have been hungry? Yeah, for sure. So,
And he knew he had the power to do it.
right. Yeah, absolutely. So hunger is obviously the thing that really jumps out there, 40 days without food. But what's really kind of underneath that? What's the bigger picture of hunger? That's a sign of something larger. That's one piece of the thing that I'm thinking here. Physical comfort, right? Our physical needs, our physical well-being is what he's coming at here.
It seems to me that throughout this, that's the focus of the statement. It's the physical.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, and I don't think he fully grasped the spiritual nature of what's transpiring before him. If he did, he wouldn't have done some of the things that he did, right? But this is kind of an amazing insight. Oh, yeah.
Well, it's physical, but he's also, it's like a double-edged sword. It's physical, you're hungry, but it's physical.
She read my notes. You're getting ahead of me.
But it's a spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the actual temptation is to do a miracle, not for the right reasons.
Yeah,
It's not a miracle that would show the power of God or announce to the world that you are from God. It just would have been
Prove it.
Satan, and then therefore only for his physical needs or his physical desire to eat something.
Sure.
Which is against the spiritual principle of the miracle, itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when we'll come back to this, those two, the spiritual side of things, because the physical thing, that's important for us. Because when we're uncomfortable, we're weaker, aren't we? If I'm suffering some physical pain, it's easy to say, well, I'm just going to sit this one out. I'll see you next week. Or it's easy for me to be less kind or patient with my family when I'm not feeling the best. And some of you may know this, but I deal with migraines and headaches quite a bit. And I'll admit to staying home when it wasn't necessarily the true debilitating nature that a migraine can get to. And I know that I've been less than kind to my family when asking them to be quiet during one of my headaches. You guys may not know this about Bowden, but he is loud all the time. I think Will's in the same boat. They're twins, I'm pretty sure. Well, not when he's asleep. I guess those are the only times he's quiet, but the rest of the time, he's going to make noise. And if he were here, he would vouch for the fact that I've probably been rude when asking him to keep it down. And don't get me wrong, I'm not even for a moment suggesting that when we miss services because of pain, that we're doing something wrong. I'm not saying that you've got to play through and be here all the time. I get it that there's times that you just can't, and I can't. But the point that I think we see here is what happens in those moments. It's that little voice you hear in your head that says, it's okay not to go. You hurt. It's okay to be rude to your family because you're suffering. It's okay to think only about yourself because of the pain you're going through. And I'm convinced that's Satan whispering in my ear because he knows you're compromised. And for the record, this is the only time that temptation has failed. Because nobody else has been sinless. So it seems like a pretty good way to go, doesn't it? That's what he does with Jesus. And of course, like I just said, he fails, but he doesn't quit because that's the only time he's ever been beaten in that. So on to your point, what's the next thing that we see as a temptation is the doubt that was brought up. In Matthew 4:3, Satan uses those two letters to question Jesus. He says, if you are the Son of God. We got to remember this is right after the events of chapter 3, where he's been baptized and the sky opens and the Spirit of God descends and a voice booms out of heaven and said, this is my son and he's pretty special to me. The devil knows all of this. And he says, yeah, right. If that were true, you wouldn't be suffering and be miserable. If you're the son of... Oh, sir.
Yeah, it sounds real familiar with Eve.
Sure, yeah.
Change the word just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this whole section has a lot of parallels that I didn't even touch on this morning just because of time with Eve, with the Israelites coming out of Egypt and the things that they went through there, and which I think are probably, I read a lot of books preparing for this, but I think it's in the Fourfold Gospel book that he covers those things. Is that a hand, Steve? Huh? McCleary? Is it McGarvey? Yeah. What did I say? Anyway, the book that you guys have there. That I have it too, but not the new shiny one. And so what the devil is saying is, are you sure about that? Like, are you really sure about that? So here's Jesus, right? He's tired and he's hungry. And you know that they have to have a knowledge of each other, right? This isn't the first time they've met. I can't imagine that Jesus is enjoying this time being with Satan, especially knowing that if he wanted it, he could have the upper hand at any moment.
Well, he does have the upper hand, he just doesn't use it.
Exactly, right. Hence Satan trying to tempt him with that, right? And then he challenges him. How many of us would have been able to hold back in that situation? If you were in his place, you're hungry, you're tired, and you know, I could feed myself. I think I would have lost it and snapped my fingers and there would have been a 5-course meal in front of me. I'd be like, fine, just stop it, leave me alone. Just to shut him up. So what we really need to be aware from this is that this is how Satan is going to come at us. When we're weak, when we doubt, Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and that's the other thing going on here too, right? Because Jesus is, it's like, you know who you are? You're talking to me that way, right? At least that would be my thought. What about the second temptation? Or is there any more thoughts on the first one before we move on? So the second thing we see is the persistence of Satan to start with, right? He doesn't give up. He's defeated the first time, but he doesn't give up. And that continued effort can be effective, can it? How many of the people in the room have a dog or a cat that they only have because their kid kept on them and on them and on them?
Paul talks about 1 Corinthians, the unrighteous judge being convinced that you go back and ask again and again.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a great example. My wife's got big eyes there because I'm in that boat. We just have a new dog in the car right now. Took some doing to get me to say, yeah, bring that home. But then he goes, so first it's the persistence, right? He's like, okay, I lost this first round. I'm going to hit him again. I'm going to keep coming. I'm going to keep coming. I'm going to keep coming. But then what he goes after, and the second one to me is trust. Okay, Jesus, you say you're going to trust God, and you just used his word a minute ago, right? Well, here's some more of it. Here's some more of God's word. Do you really trust it? Are you sure about that? You just said you did. And again, if he used that tactic on Jesus, he's going to use it on us too, isn't he? Again, he fails a second time with Jesus, but he's going to try and use it on you and me.
He does.
Absolutely. How many times do we make a decision without asking God about it first?
I feel like this is here also to just teach us who Satan is and how to battle against him, because there is an intimate nature, or he knows that he has a knowledge, an intimate knowledge of our nature as human beings. And we have this account, we can look at it and we can say, okay, how is he coming at us? We can learn from it. But just to never underestimate the nature of Satan.
Right.
And then just see how Jesus works that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, you're venturing into my lesson territory there. I think she's got to be reading my notes. I'm kidding. Maybe we have been talking to God about these things. We've been praying about something, but we don't feel like he's answering us. And so we think, well, I'm just going to handle this. I got it. It's not that big a deal. We lean on our own understanding instead of leaning and trusting in the Lord to work it out for us. And so, two main things to take away from the second temptation are, number one, that the devil he's going to be relentless. He's going to try and cause you to question whether or not you truly trust the Lord. It's just the way he works. He doesn't give up. And so we have to be ready for that. Was that a hand? Oh, okay. So what do you guys think about the third temptation? Any ideas on that one? In Matthew. I think this third one is a temptation of ease, or the easier path for Jesus, is how I envision this. And let me explain this. Some of you may know who Edwin Crozier is, but he has a view on this that I really kind of like for a couple of reasons. And the first is that some people say, well, wait a second. This wasn't a real temptation because Satan didn't own all that stuff he offered him. So he couldn't have given it to him in the first place. Well,
God gives him authority over all earthly kingdoms.
well, that's true. That's true.
In Revelation, other places, yes, it did. He did have power over all that stuff. He had authority over that stuff.
Gotcha.
From God, but he did. I think the real temptation here is the fact that the way Jesus replies. Are we serving God or are we serving mammon?
Right.
You can't serve both.
Right.
And he was saying, I think the temptation was you could serve me too. Like you wouldn't be not serving God if you just served me and had these kingdoms. And I think that's kind of what
Sure.
Satan was trying to, the angle he was taking. Of course, Jesus knows that all of it's from God, all of it's
Sure.
from God. Therefore, if he's serving, if you're on the side that wins, then you're going to win, right? As it were,
Right.
And he didn't, I don't think he was tempted by the physical glory of kingdom.
Sure. Well, the point that Edwin makes, regardless of the fact that whether or not it was actually his to give, I just heard that argument. I'm not saying that's what I believe necessarily, but the way that he describes it is Satan is saying, you know what's ahead of us. You know the battle that it's going to be to get to where you're going. The suffering that you're going to have to endure all the way up to the cross. But if you bow down to me right now, just this once, it's over. I'll step out of the way. You can have it without suffering like that. And we know that, and the other thing that's interesting too is that word there for bow down to me, it isn't continual. It's a singular word. It's one time. Because he knows one time's all it takes and the plan's bust, right?
Well, the disadvantage that Satan has is Christ knew who Satan was and knew his personality. And he knew he was a liar.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of know that this was tempting for Jesus because of what he says in Matthew 26:39, right? Where he says, let this cup pass from me. I know what's coming. I'm willing to go through it, but if there's another way, let's do that. Any of you relish the idea of having your hands and feet pierced? If you know that's what's coming?
Well, Satan didn't really offer him anything that wasn't already his. I mean, he had the ability to take all of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it wasn't like, Satan was offering him something that, he couldn't take control of if he wanted to.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, all of these things have multiple, because he could have just called in the angels and said, let's be done with this, right? But again, let this pass from me. I know what's coming. It's the ease that,
To your point, offer of ease, it has to do with private life, or connection with private life. And if this wasn't a temptation, then it doesn't count. So it's true temptation for private life.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that more in the lesson because that's an important point. And all of these, the thing that I didn't touch on is pride that Jesus is attacking, isn't it? If you really have all this power, if you're really this Savior of the world, why are you being treated this way? Prove it to me. Again and again and again, prove it to me, if you really are. And how many of us could withstand that constant attack on our pride?
How many of us don't?
Well, yeah, exactly.
How many of us fall to the need? I'm important. I'm more important than God because I want to do this, so I'm going to do it. Irrespective of what God says.
Sure. And is that, what do you think the cause of that is? Why do we fall to that so easily? Because it's easy, yeah. Because how are we going to, and again, I don't want to get too far into my lesson. That's the problem with these two things overlapping, but how do we, sorry. Absolutely, yeah. Never lose sight of that. Never, and I think a lot of times when you read this, they seem, especially for people who've grown up in the church, they seem like just characters sometimes, right? They're just this bad guy in the story. But he's a whole lot more than a bad guy in a story. And he's going to come for us. Steve, was that a hand?
Well, it wasn't the hand that I might make.
Oh.
Now, I keep thinking, what made Jesus so perfect? And he answers a question for a lot of people. You know, you cannot find anything imperfect in Jesus. He was in all ways tempted as we are, and yet without sin.
Right.
So this is the start of that temptation in a way.
Sure.
And all the way down to the death on the cross. He never yielded, not once.
Right.
Every way that we could be tempted, Jesus was tempted, and he came out victorious.
Right, and that's something we get from the Luke account that we don't in Matthew, where it says every way, not just the three we see here. Anything that we've ever faced as a human race, he faced it. It says so right there in the Luke account. He's done it and won, overcome, which just those, I mean, we get I think of them as the big three, but that's what we get here as what's detailed for us. But just think about that. Think about think about the area where you are weakest. The thing that he keeps hitting you over and over and over again with. And where, unfortunately, as humans, we fail. Jesus suffered that temptation. And he made it through. And since we're comparing Jesus to us and how he was tempted, do you think he just did these things once? Do you think he came just like he does with me? Whatever areas I'm weak in, he hits me over and over again. I would be willing to bet he did the exact same thing with Christ. Over and over and over again on the things where he knew he might struggle the most. Just like he does with us.
I don't know that he knew, but he hoped. He hoped he would struggle.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. But again, that's his MO, right? He goes at the thing that you're weakest at. He knows.
He knows because we demonstrate it by doing it.
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't think Satan can read our heart like the Lord can. But we go out and do it. And so, hey, that worked. I'm going to try that again.
Sure. That's an interesting way to put that. I hadn't thought about that. What time do we stop? 10:35? Okay. Well, then we'll be done a minute early here, and that's everything pretty much that I was supposed to cover this morning, so we'll pick it up for the lesson later.